to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrop.
And how about that vice presidential debate?
Ha, ha, ha,
we are taping on Tuesday. We haven't seen that, but we can go back into ancient history and dissect the Romney-Obama debate. That
very ancient at this point.
Seems to have changed the race.
Well, what we can talk about that's more current is the Log Cabin Club and whether they're going to endorse Mr. Romney. And they say they're going to hinge it on whether he endorses the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. I'm not sure I believe that.
Wasn't he once in favor of that?
And then he was against it.
I see.
It's the Etch-a-Sketch.
All right. The Boy Scouts never cease to amaze. They dumped a gay scout on the verge of him becoming an Eagle Scout, but the real story is how his troop reacted to this.
Andy doesn't think this is a headline, but it did happen again recently. Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia has shown great contempt for gay people.
That's about how I feel about him. Very, very sad, shocking and sad news this week. Gay and AIDS activist Donald Suggs has died at the age of 51. He's the reason that we do this show at MNN. He got us in here.
We'll tell you about him. And also shocking is that a gaming company has admitted that they funded the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force to the tune of $300,000 to fight a gambling bill in Maryland that was going to open some competitive casinos for them.
TV weatherman on ABC, Sam Champion, has announced his upcoming wedding to his male partner, and all of ABC celebrates.
It's quite the sight. GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, says that LGBT regular series characters are at an all-time high.
Yep. I'm going to review a new play by Daisy Foote. She's the daughter of the great Horton Foote, and an old one by William Shakespeare.
You've heard of him. Our guest is longtime gay activist David Rothenberg about his new memoir, Fortune in My Eyes, so named because you may remember he produced the play Fortune in Men's Eyes and created the Fortune Society.
And he's going to talk about his life as a publicist, a producer, an advocate, a great advocate for ex-offenders, a gay activist, and a candidate for public office.
In what other interview will you hear about both Elizabeth Taylor and Attica?
That's true.
But we start, of course, with the campaign. And because we tape on Tuesdays and these debates are coming up in the middle of the week, we have not yet talked about the Romney-Obama debate.
I don't want to.
Well, here's one theory. Obama's playing rope-a-dope and just laying back and letting Romney tell his lies.
Yeah, according to the Pew poll, that cost him about a 10-point swing in the polls.
It did, and he is going to have to come back. But I will say one thing, which is that I heard that Romney was prepared for Obama to attack him. And he had all sorts of comebacks planned, and that by Obama not attacking him, he was deprived of some of his jabs.
Well, first of all, I was pretty bored by the whole thing. I can't stand Romney, and
Really?
But what I really, and he was being so mendacious, so outrageous with his lies. It was like, come on, doesn't everybody see through this? No, they don't. Lying is the coin of the realm in politics.
Well,
people love to be lied to. They don't like to be told the truth.
They like a benevolent patriarch who is going to relieve them of any responsibility to do anything.
But we want to see our guy fighting for the things that we stand for,
and I think,
fighting for them.
I think he got that message, if only from Chris Matthews immediately after the debate, who lost his mind. But this was supposed to be a domestic issues debate. All they talked about were lies about the economy, nothing about social issues. That, I think, really hurts us.
Here's the thing. A week and a half ago, the election was over and Obama had won.
Yes.
And now the election is over and Romney has won. I mean, it just, it does, and people feel it. I've been getting calls from friends from around the country, very depressed about all this.
Look, it turned on a dime last week. It will turn on several more dimes in the month to come. We are now at the real important
Crunch time.
point. But who knew that? I watched.
I'm glad most of you in Ohio have voted already.
Unlike you, I was glued to the debate and watched every second of it.
And how
intensely.
are you feeling as you did?
Horrified. And I kept watching Obama look down, and I thought, pick up your head, you idiot. But what...
Is that the way to talk to the President of the United States?
Yes, when he's acting like that. But what surprised me, two things. I've heard the Republicans talk about cutting PBS for years. It never occurred to me that when Romney talked about cutting PBS, that this would become the headline out of the debate, because to me that wasn't news.
Well, nobody knows what,
Evidently,
Simpson Bowles is.
Evidently,
Dodd-Frank, Simpson Bowles.
No one's paying attention. So I'm thrilled that Big Bird became the headline. The other thing is that people did seem to notice that Romney was lying, and I think there is a real opening. So even though I certainly think Romney was the net winner, I was happy that there was also a lot of criticism.
Man will say anything to get elected, but our viewers already know that.
And since we are taping before the Biden-Ryan debates, you want to go on the record with any predictions now that people will have seen it by the time they see this?
I mean, not really. I mean, come on. I don't know what they've got planned. I mean, I think Joe is a much more, even though I think he's a fruity bird, and he, really, I mean, we've had him on, we've run tapes of him.
What kind of language is that?
We have run tapes on this show of him trying to answer questions, and he just goes on and on and on and on and on. I hope he doesn't do that.
Me too. But I think he'll be sure. I thought he gave one of the best speeches at the convention.
I was not making an anti-gay slur.
Yeah.
No.
I liked him at the convention. I have faith in Joe Biden.
Okay.
All right. But does the Log Cabin Club have faith in Governor Romney?
Well, they've been dancing with him, and they want to be able to endorse the candidate of their party. They do not endorse Democrats. They only endorse Republicans, or they sometimes
they're a Republican club.
Sometimes in a moral crisis. Come on, every Democrat in this town endorsed John Lindsay for mayor.
You have a rich fantasy life. The Log Cabin Republicans have a mixed history of endorsing Republican candidates for president. They have endorsed some. They've had their checks returned by some, and they have failed to endorse some. They did endorse McCain. They did not endorse Bush the second time, and they have not yet endorsed Romney as we tape, but they are expecting to get a meeting with him, and they say they want him to endorse the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which in the past he has been both for and against.
I'm surprised they're for it. It's a civil rights bill. No, and I don't say that. I don't say that because they're against civil rights, but a lot of them are libertarians, and they don't believe in forcing businesses to comply with these things. They have a libertarian view of it. It's not necessarily anti-gay. But anyway.
Well, the Romney campaign did fire their gay guy who was a foreign policy expert when it became clear that he was a gay guy who endorsed marriage equality. And I think they ought to throw that in his face as an example of inappropriate employment discrimination.
Absolutely.
But I suspect that Romney will say to them, I believe in treating everybody fairly and everybody should be judged on their merits, but I'm not endorsing legislation like this. And then they'll go ahead and endorse him.
Well.
Just one woman's prediction.
All right.
Meanwhile, the Victory Fund, which does endorse only out LGBT candidates, Republican and Democratic, and they're under a little fire for some Republicans they've endorsed, but they have endorsed a record 175 out LGBT candidates this cycle. And if you want to keep track of them and who they've endorsed and how they do, you can go to victoryfund.org for the list of the 175 out LGBT Victory Fund endorsed candidates.
All right. And the Boy Scouts is not endorsing, what's the fellow's name? Ryan Anderson from California, member of Troop 212 in Moraga, Moraga, California. He's on the verge of becoming an Eagle Scout, and they say, you're gay, you're not getting it.
Well, he came out because he had been bullied, and the bullying had become a subject, and he'd helped a local school build a wall of tolerance. And when he came out, they said, no.
Right. But the great thing about the story is that his fellow Scouts have rallied behind him, and some of them have pledged to give their Eagle Scout pins, and this is something they've worked for all their lives, to him if the troop refuses to readmit him.
I have mixed feelings about that.
Well, why would you want to be a member of an anti-gay organization at all?
Exactly.
Is of course the issue. But
To me,
I'm touched by it.
Well, I'm touched by the fact that his mother started a change.org petition, and as we tape, has 350,000 signatures on
Right.
it.
And as our friend Mike Signorelli, who does Sirius Radio gay stuff, has pointed out, the CEOs who are members of the Boy Scouts board can no longer say this isn't anything but ugliness. This is not going to change, as you say. And people like Randall Stevens from AT&T and the guy from Ernst & Young, James Turley, should resign from the board.
Well,
they're not going to get change from within.
Intel pulled out as a sponsor a week or two ago. The reason they're not going to get change is because the Boy Scouts are controlled by the Mormon Church and the Catholic Church, yes. And those organizations are not going to change their attitude.
Well, they can't. I mean,
exactly.
They have eternal truth.
Exactly. And thus the Boy Scouts will not change, and therefore this idea that these executives are going to change it when they take over the board is nonsense. Meanwhile, Ryan appeared this week on the Ellen DeGeneres show for National Coming Out Day, which I think is sweet.
We told you last week and the week before about, California has banned this anti-gay cure therapy for kids. For kids, New Jersey is now going to introduce a bill to do it as well, but it remains quite controversial. And I talked to people in New York about it who were in a position to make it happen, and they're not sure they want to do it. They might try to do something through, regulation within the profession or, without legislation, but they're not jumping on the bandwagon here.
Well, the controversy is about the freedom to practice, I assume.
Right.
But if you define it as child abuse, then you outlaw it.
Our friend Jack Drescher, who's an out gay psychiatrist, says, that he does not think this is the way to go. You should. He said you should inform people about the dangers of it. But when you get into
there are mixed opinions.
Yes.
There are other psychiatric professionals who do support it. In fact, many of the professional organizations signed on to the California bill.
And he did. And my friend George Weinberg, who was the guy who wrote Society and the Healthy Homosexual, and said immediately that it should have been done long ago.
Meanwhile, Michelle Bachmann's in a little trouble. She showed up at a synagogue in Lakeview, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, on Yom Kippur Eve, where she was being honored.
Well,
honored.
Well, I think she was just introduced from the crowd. The rabbi said, and we have Michelle Bachmann with us.
I think she was being honored.
But it upset people so much.
They're a pro-gay synagogue.
That
some walked out.
It spoiled the day for them.
Some donated to her opponent immediately.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
Well, so, the Lord works in strange ways.
Yeah.
Right?
Out-gay Los Angeles City Councilman Bill Rosendahl has announced he is not going to run for re-election next year for a third term because he is battling cancer. He says he's doing okay and he will continue to be active, but he's not going to run for re-election.
And we just lost in California the former Lieutenant Governor Mervyn Mervyn. I have Mervyn.
You're right.
Mervyn Dimally.
Dimally.
Dimally, D-Y-M-A-L-L-Y, an early African-American civil rights pioneer who did an awful lot on LGBT rights, including casting the deciding vote in 1975 when the Senate was deadlocked on whether to allow sodomy in the state.
He flew back from Colorado to Sacramento on an emergency basis.
They were in a deadlock.
They locked everybody in the Senate until he made it back to cast that vote.
They locked everybody. It was George Moscone, the mayor who was head of the Senate. He was the guy who was killed with Harvey Milk. He was the mayor, but he did that so they could break the tie.
Yeah.
Anyway, a great leader.
Yeah. Not a great leader, of course, is Dan Cathy of Chick-fil-A, We've been wondering whether, in fact, they had changed their stripes. I'm sure there's a better chicken-related metaphor than that on same-sex marriage, because someone blew the whistle on them as taking their profits and donating them to organizations that fight same-sex marriage and any kind of LGBT rights. And then they said, oh, no, we're going to stop doing that. And then there was a question about whether they really did stop doing that. So Dan Cathy has been in the background all the time, the CEO, and an Atlanta TV station has finally gotten him on camera talking about his attitude, and we thought you'd like to see this.
If with any luck.
Since his restaurant became a lightning rod for controversy last month, the president of Chick-fil-A spoke on camera about it. Our Matt Pearl spoke with Dan Cathy this past weekend and joins us now.
Yes, and it all came as quite the surprise. On Saturday, I covered an event at the Cathy's Ranch in The Rock, Georgia. That story aired Sunday night. Chick-fil-A President Dan Cathy was there for a separate event and offered an interview about the ranch. I said, of course, but only if we could ask about the recent controversy over Cathy's statements about gay marriage. Cathy agreed, but as you'll see, he didn't want to say much.
Do you feel Chick-fil-A was developing more controversy than you'd want for a company with that kind of respect?
Well, Chick-fil-A's focused on families. We've always been that way. We're a family-owned business. We're led by a family, and our restaurants are operated by families, and we serve millions of families every week at Chick-fil-A, so we're focused on the family.
Yes, he ignores the question and, in case you were counting, says the word family 6 times in 11 seconds. Cathy did open up a little bit with the next question. Remember, all of the boycotts and rallies surrounding Chick-fil-A this summer came after Cathy said the company was, quote, guilty as charged in opposing gay marriage, and that they believe in the traditional or, quote, biblical family. He used that phrase again Saturday.
Well, families are very important to our country. They're very important, I think, to all of us that are concerned about being able to hang on to the heritage that we have, and we support biblical families. We've always been a part of that.
And that was it. Cathy obviously not wanting to say much and not offering much time, but still trumpeting heritage and biblical families in his first on-camera comment since the controversy. Matt Pearl, 11 Alive News.
Well, he didn't just say family 16 times. He said focus on the family, which is the name of the anti-gay group.
Yeah, so I don't think that Chick-fil-A has changed its attitude or practices.
That will help with my diet.
Now, Andy has also been upset about Ted Olson being the tutor of Paul Ryan for the debate against Joe Biden, given Ted Olson's heroic status in the gay community at the moment because of his fighting Prop 8.
And he's done a great job on that. But so I just don't understand why that would not give him some insight into the fact that if we get another Republican president, if we get Romney, that he's going to appoint judges who are totally against this, and an administration that's totally against this, and that is for a constitutional amendment against this. I mean, they're very out on that, and yet he's helping that ticket. And I don't see how you can reconcile those two things once you've taken such a strong stand for what you say is basic human rights.
A, he's a Republican. He helped George Bush get elected. Now, the reason I bring this up at all is because he and David Boyce did a public forum with Rachel Maddow questioning them at NYU Law School.
And she brought this up with him.
Which you can see on Toll Road, TOWLEROAD.com. They posted the whole thing. And she asked him about this, Ted Olson, and what he said, and this may speak to his, I don't want to say arrogance, but confidence about the fact that he can convince anybody of anything. He says that the debate prep was a chance for him to change Ryan's mind. I'm just explaining, I'm not supporting. And what
maybe it's already happened. We haven't seen the debate.
That's right. Maybe he has announced his support for same-sex marriage. But Olson's point was, I am playing Joe Biden. I get to make all the arguments in favor of same-sex marriage. I'm going to talk him into this, and I'm going to kill this bug.
Well,
I did kill the bug.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's Ted Olson's excuse, believe it or not. But he is a Republican. He's never shied away from the fact that he's a Republican.
Okay. Well, I don't think that the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence changed the position of Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone as the new Archbishop of San Francisco, who was really one of the prime movers behind Prop 8. But they did demonstrate there.
As did members of Get Equal.
And they accused him of the dogma of bullying and said, "Silly Sally, you have no power here."
But here's the real story. The Episcopal Bishop of California, Mark Andrus, showed up for the installation of the new Archbishop.
Even though he is much in disagreement with the Catholic Archbishop about same-sex marriage.
And he'd written him a letter saying that we disagree about this, but I look forward to working with you on all these issues of like poverty and human rights and everything.
So they kept him in a holding cell for the whole ceremony downstairs.
He was in the basement. They would not let him upstairs for the ceremony.
They said it was an oversight.
Oh, please.
They said it was an oversight.
They admitted that he had done the right thing by leaving when they wouldn't let him out of the basement.
Who cares? The new Pew poll says that 1/5 of the American people don't identify with any religion anymore. Now, it also said that 68% of those people still believe in God, but
you think Antonin Scalia claims to believe in God?
He's a good Catholic, isn't he?
Well, he gave a speech to the American Enterprise Institute. Yes, he is a Catholic. And he was talking about, being a constitutional originalist and blah, blah. I want to know how they decide cases on airplanes if they're constitutional originalists. But he said, homosexual sodomy? Come on. For 200 years, it was criminal in every state.
He's got a point.
Please.
It took us a long time to get rid of that, and no thanks to him.
Why isn't he wearing clothes from the 1700s is my question.
He's a bad guy.
Very bad guy.
Yeah.
And we mourn the death of Army Staff Sergeant Donna Johnson, 29 years old, the first out lesbian member of the Army or Armed Forces killed since Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. Right. Killed by a Taliban suicide bomber in Afghanistan. She was married to her longtime partner, Tracy Dice, who's also in the military, and just a sad story.
And if Romney has anything to do with it, we'll be sending troops back there in greater force to finish the job.
And many other places.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what concerns me. The American Center for Law and Justice, which is Pat Robertson's legal organization, has fired one of their main attorneys, James Henderson, married, 8 kids, and believed to be having sex with 2 young men he met on Facebook.
Well, 2 men we hope are having sex are Sam Champion and his partner, who Sam Champion, you know, from the news as the weatherman on Good Morning America. He, at the wedding of Patrick Abner and Thomas Roberts, you know, Thomas Roberts from MSNBC now?
Yes.
Yes, the TV announcer. His partner actually is the one who said we're going to be getting married in New Year's Eve in Miami.
No, party in Miami, married in New York.
Well, that's what the quote was, but then actually it was the partner, Robierb, he's Brazilian, who said we're going to do it officially and then have a party in Miami. So they're happy and everybody's celebrating.
Well, the interesting thing was that everybody, all the on-air personalities at ABC started tweeting these messages of, oh, congratulations, Sam, this is great.
And that's the stuff we're trying to protect children from, is celebrating marriages on morning television.
Well, here's my
That's
question.
what the right wing thinks. They don't want to talk about it in school. They don't want to talk about it anywhere.
Well,
they want it to be illegal.
I want to know what happened this week. You will know because you will have seen this after we have taped, but before you see this show. Ann Romney is guest hosting Good Morning America this week for an hour. Does she congratulate Sam Champion on his impending marriage? I'm guessing no.
Maybe all part of the plan.
Yeah.
And then, we didn't report last week that Arnold Schwarzenegger, who twice vetoed a same-sex marriage bill in California, was asked if he went to the wedding of his chief of staff, a lesbian, and he said, I performed the ceremony. I mean, it's just sickening to hear that.
Yeah. And not a hypocrite, Paul Tagliabue, the former NFL commissioner with a gay son who's been out for many years. Paul Tagliabue's been supportive for many years.
Tagliabue, who runs PFLAG in New York.
Paul gave $100,000 to the pro-marriage campaign in Maryland.
Yeah, go ahead.
Anti-marriage ads are now running, claiming that a married mom and dad are best for kids, while death and divorce too often prevent it.
Listen, the ads sound terrible. They sound almost clinical.
Well, they've gotten hip to the fact that, they make this claim when the real truth is that the surveys show that two parents are best for kids.
Right.
But they have distorted this into a married mom and dad. But when we say to them, so you're saying single people shouldn't have kids, so they're now allowing for that.
Right. And then also in Maryland, we've got this situation with NGLTF, where they took all this money, we talked about it at the top of the show, to try to stop an initiative that would have opened up gambling. So another gaming company said, we don't want this. And the governor wanted it. He's a big supporter of same-sex marriage. And NGLTF sort of rationalized this, that it was going to somehow help the marriage fight.
What they said was, if this is on the ballot along with the marriage question, we will lose votes. I don't even know how they rationalized that. But they took over $300,000, $343,125 from the Penn National Gaming Company through a consulting firm, and spent it on handing out flyers against this gaming referendum, which, by the way, the legislature passed and will be on the ballot along with the marriage question.
Governor O'Malley said they got rolled.
I think they did.
Well, I mean, they didn't want to reveal the source of this.
Yeah.
Just like NAM, the National Organization for Marriage, doesn't want to reveal their donors.
Horrible. Well, HRC raised $390,000 for the marriage fights in the 4 states that are coming up. They also gave a National Equality Award to Ben Jealous of the NAACP and an Ally for Equality Award to Sally Field.
Introduced by her son, and it was charming. If you go online and watch that.
HRC.org, you can find it. Her out gay son,
Very
Sam
funny.
Griesman.
Very
Very
funny.
charming.
Very funny.
And the Republican candidate for Senate in Connecticut, Linda McMahon, got a little tongue-tied when asked about marriage in her debate with her Democratic opponent.
What did she say?
She said, I absolutely support America's law for same-sex marriage, and I wouldn't pretend to try to impose my will or rights on others. I think everyone should have the freedom to make that choice.
So when this comes up in the next presidential debate, I hope Barack Obama does better and doesn't get tongue-tied.
Well, her Democratic opponent, Murphy, said, see, she doesn't even know what the law is, and she kissed this off in 20 seconds. What she did clarify later is that she, because same-sex marriage is now legal in Connecticut, she has changed her opinion, and she thinks it would be only fair to repeal the Defense of Marriage Act.
Yeah, the Romney campaign had a lot of clarifying to do after their debate, but that's not what makes headlines. Yeah. All right, some international news? You got a couple of other things?
Yes, Orlando Cruz, Puerto Rican 4th-ranked featherweight in the world, ex-Olympian from 2000, has come out, and that has turned out to be a big story.
Because people in sports, it is always. He says he's a proud gay man. He's 31.
We should also take a minute to mourn the death of our friend and colleague Donald Suggs, who died of a heart attack this last weekend at 51.
There he is. Donald was a fun-loving guy and a brilliant guy, and he was the director of public policy for the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation in its kind of in its heyday, when it was really just getting to be built as an organization.
And had a big fight there, because as it became more corporate, he got really angry and said, you're losing your grassroots activist roots here, right, and this is the wrong way to go.
He did a tremendous amount around AIDS work, around transgender issues.
Was an editor at the Village Voice and a board member here at Manhattan Neighborhood Network, where we produce this show. And it was Donald Suggs who called us up 11 years ago and said, I want 2 things from you. I want you to come talk to the kids here who produce a youth show.
The Youth Channel.
about AIDS issues and educate them. And I want you to bring your Gay USA show here because I know you need a new home and we want you here.
So thank you, Donald, for your life and everything.
It's a real loss, and he was only 51. And Donald, you were terrific. He was on this show several times, too. We will miss you. All right. International news, yes.
Well, speaking of transgender issues, it's great to see the brave transgender Malaysians who are standing up for themselves. You know, everybody has to carry around an ID in that country. It's getting there here in this country too. And of course, their appearance does not match the gender on the name on the thing. So they're suing about this finally, and they're invoking the Malaysian Constitution.
And we remind you, if you're a transgender in this country, make sure you're in position to vote. Bad news from Serbia, where Belgrade Pride was canceled over so-called safety concerns, second year in a row.
Same-sex marriage seems to be moving along in Great Britain. Now, the two of the top cabinet members, George Osborne and William Hague, have come out for it. But there's a lot of grumbling in the back benches, but it's something that they ought to be able to pass, but they're not doing it there until 2015, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
AIDS news.
Yes.
New York City Department of Health has reversed itself and decided to push the meningitis vaccine, especially for HIV-positive men, especially for those having sex with new unknown partners. If you want information about the meningitis vaccine, go to nyc.gov and you can find out what local health clinic you can get it at.
And of course, now everybody in the country is concerned about meningitis because of these epidurals. I've had them in the past that are made by these compounding companies.
For back pain.
I never heard of compounding companies before this, but it's scary.
But that's fungal meningitis, and the outbreak among HIV-positive men is bacterial meningitis, which is more communicable.
Correct.
And either one of them is a problem, and you should be careful about that. We've told you about the movie How to Survive a Plague, one of the movies out now about AIDS activism and ACT UP. It is available on video on demand on your cable system. Look for How to Survive a Plague, and you can see it for a couple of bucks on your TV.
I see our guest David Rothenberg. We'll be talking to him in a few minutes.
Yeah.
But we've got just a couple of other things to talk about. Well, we've told you about home HIV tests. You can now do this at home, and it's instant. It's
rapid screening
tells you in a few minutes whether you've got it. The Times did a big story about people like, are they going to start screening the people that they bring home and ask them to take a test to confirm what they've said about themselves in terms of their status? Interesting social prospect.
Well, it's a potential problem because none of this involves counseling.
Right.
Or, real professional advice about this. And the other thing is that you could screen people when they're asleep. And
take a little swab.
Yes, and that could turn into a real issue.
Could get ugly.
It really could,
and of
so
course
be careful.
Right.
Also, a decision from the Supreme Court of Canada on two cases about whether people with HIV can be prosecuted for having unprotected sex. Or not informing their partners.
On the one hand, they said if you're undetectable and you use a condom, no big, we don't care.
But activists say that's a step back because it
Exactly.
used to just be using a condom, and now they've set the standard of realistic possibility of transmission, and it's considered not a good decision. So it's still very problematic.
A couple of entertainment news notes.
Yes.
I saw the new play by Daisy Foote, who's the daughter of Horton Foote, who wrote the screenplay for To Kill a Mockingbird and some great plays. And it stars the other Horton Foote daughter, Hallie Foote, and they're wonderful. I will say this is one of those plays. It's called Him at New World Stages, and it does have a gay sub-theme. You got to give it a chance to warm up. I don't usually say that.
I rarely do.
You would have been going at intermission, but I really liked it by the end, and I
Okay.
recommend it.
What's it called?
Him.
Okay.
It's about the guy upstairs. Well, it's a long story.
GLAAD.org, the new annual report on LGBT characters on scripted TV. They're now up to 4.4% of characters. I say, why are you ignoring all the real gay people on TV, on reality TV shows? We're everywhere. And it's fascinating, and those are much more interesting to me than the scripted characters. But if you want to read the GLAAD report, go to GLAAD.org.
Now, our guest, David Rothenberg, Rathenberg talked about was the publicist for the Broadway production of Hamlet with Richard Burton back in the 60s, but there's sort of a chamber production of it from the Globe at Pace University, which is a very clear production of it. I didn't quite get the fact that at the end they all stood up and started dancing around after they died, but which the Times said was no big deal, but I thought was ridiculous. But there's some really engaging actors doing it, including Michael Benz as Hamlet.
Book review in the New York Times this weekend. New book, All We Know, 3 Lives by Lisa Cohen, about 3 major lesbians from the 20s and 30s, I think. Esther Murphy, Mercedes de Acosta, and Madge Garland. Sounds like a fascinating book, All We Know.
And if you watch television, you might have noticed that there are a lot more LGBT characters
Just
on
talked
television.
about that.
Right.
This weekend, we talked about the history of ACT UP, but not mentioned as often as the Lesbian Avengers, a very important activist group. And there's a panel discussing the Lesbian Avengers with many veterans of the group Saturday, 3 p.m. At Dixon Place at 161A Christie Street. And there's also a movie about the battle for same-sex marriage in Maine called Question 1 that is opening at the Chelsea Clearview on October 19th, and in San Francisco at the Vogue on the 26th. And that's enough. Let's get to our guest.
Pleased and honored to have David Rathenberg here, my old friend and the author of a new memoir called Fortune in My Eyes, a memoir of Broadway glamour, social justice, and political passion, just to bring the youngsters up to date. You know, you've been a gay activist since the early 70s. This is a long time. Publicist and a producer, the founder in 1967 of the Fortune Society for Ex-Offenders, done tremendous work there. You were a candidate for city council in 1985, a former city human rights commissioner, and you're still a radio host on WBAI on Saturday mornings. Welcome.
I can leave now. You said it all. I have nothing to say.
You must be tired.
Yes, I'm exhausted from all of that.
But David, when you one of the things you say in the book is you wrote it because you sort of wanted to look at your whole life and how the different parts fit together. How do they fit together?
I wrote it because after I was swimming one day, a woman said, "Will you stop telling these stories and put it down on paper?" And I said, "Who would care?" And you know, you live your life. You don't think anybody's going to be particularly interested. And she said, "I would. I'm a literary agent. You write it. I'll represent you."
Well, let's try to take you through this trajectory.
All right.
So I know this is not your favorite thing to talk about, but your celebrity years as a press agent on Broadway. You wanted to be involved with the theater.
I did. I saw All About Eve when I was in high school, and I wanted to be in that world.
Okay.
And I didn't know how. But I didn't know how. And I answered ads in the New York Times when I got out of the Army in 1959. And I was hired.
Oh my God, how old are you?
103. The answer to the question is, I don't say I'm 79 because people, particularly younger people, oh, that's so old. But if you say I'm in my 80th year, they applaud. You made it. God, that's wonderful. Anyway, it was 59. I came to New York out of the Army, and I wanted to be in the theater. And I answered an ad in the New York Times. I had several other jobs, typing and filing papers and whatnot. And then I got an ad, answered an ad and got a job working as a publicist. And within 3 years, I was good at it. Somebody told me when you get into a place where you really, any young people watching, if you get a job in a field that you want, make yourself indispensable. Learn who everyone is, know what's happening. I guess now you have to learn how to work all those machines. I learned how to work a mimeograph machine.
Yes.
What's
got
that?
pink and got ink all over my hand. And people hired me for jobs, and then Alex Cohn interviewed me and asked me to handle.
Famous Broadway producer Alexander Cohn.
Yeah,
yes.
and asked me to handle all of his shows exclusively. That was in '62, just 3 years later, and I was really I went into a world that it was incredible. Suddenly I'm having lunch with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton and John Gielgud and flying to London for an opening of a show and going to Rome to meet Gattini and Giovannini, who ran the
You
Teatro
produced
Sistina.
Beyond the Fringe with Alan
I did
Bennett.
the publicity. I did the publicity with
Right, I'm
Beyond
sorry,
the
yes.
Fringe. That was the first show that Alex did that I was working on.
And how was that world? Because people do, of course, have these romantic, glamorous notions of it.
The golden age.
Well, you know, I think now people see the red carpet, and I cringe. You know, I just see all the people in the background holding the coats, and I think, God, I'm glad I'm not there. I loved the work, and so I was not caught up in the social aspect of it. I really loved the work, and I was good at it. And I wasn't particularly good at socializing, probably because I was living a duplicitous life. That may have been part of it. And but the Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor experience, as wonderful as they were, talented as they were, and as kind as they were to me, it wasn't theater. It was a zoo because of the paparazzi and the public screaming all over the place.
There were mobs.
I was the Boston story. The show opened in Toronto. Let me just tell you. Do you have enough time?
Go ahead.
The first time we met, Alec, I arrived at the King Edward Hotel, and they were being picketed by the Legion of Decency because an unmarried couple was cohabitating, and this was '63, and that was a shanda. A shanda is not nice.
Yeah,
and
I'm assimilated.
and it was hysteria, and hundreds of people all over the place. And Alex said, we're going to clear the dining room at 2 o'clock and we're going to have lunch. And it was Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor, Sir John Gielgud, Alex Cohn, and me, a business lunch. And it was, you know, how we were going to handle the press. And I gave Richard the list of the 8,000 people that wanted to talk to him. And then they went on with production things. And Elizabeth said, oh, they don't need us. Let's go sit over there. And I'm having lunch with the most beautiful, glamorous woman in the entertainment field. And was fascinated because the fact that she was so other-oriented. She wanted to know all about me. And I had worked with divas, and this was a very different experience. Who are you? She wanted to know you look very young. How did you get this job? And she was charming, and we became friends. We were stuck in Toronto during the rehearsals, and so we hung out together.
So did it
And
then?
I was her date at the opening night, and I like to say I'm one of the men that dated Elizabeth that didn't marry her.
I envy you that.
She was nice. She was a nice lady.
So did it then make sense to you that she was such an AIDS activist?
No, when I saw her after Rock Hudson and that whole thing with when she challenged Reagan, I said, of course, it figured, because she was concerned about people around her. And in Boston, I got knocked out by the cops because I was the advance man, and there were thousands of people at the airport.
As you say in the book, when you did run for city council in 1985, it was because of the burgeoning AIDS crisis, which had started in 1981. Yeah. But we'll go back first, because you've always had a social conscience, and you did produce the play Fortune in Men's Eyes, which was about prison life, written by an ex-offender. And tell us about that experience and how it changed your life completely.
You know, after the Burton Taylor thing, I left New York. I went to Rome and lived there for several months. And I said, if I came back to New York and worked in the theater, I want to work in the kind of theater that excited me, that I didn't want to be around the paparazzi and all that. I wanted theater of substance, and I produced a play called Viet Rock, which was the first anti-war play in the '66. And then I read the script of Fortune in Men's Eyes. And I had read I've seen prison movies. You know, they were either rioting or
Caged.
with Hope Emerson as the warden. They were either escaping or rioting.
Yeah.
But this was a play about a kid who got raped in his first night, and I had never. It was a new world to me, and I was horrified when I read it, and I read it again, and I wrote to John Herbert, the playwright, and said I felt like I had been locked in a room with 4 cobras. And I went to meet him, and I learned that it was indeed his experience, that as a 16-year-old he had been gang raped in prison on his first night. And you try to imagine that. And the play was startling and powerful. And I gave it to producers. Nobody wanted to produce it, and I did it myself. And when the play was running, a group of students from St. John's came with their professor, and they wanted to have a dialogue afterwards, and that was right up my alley. You know, this was the '60s when you didn't have to apologize for caring, and
you were a press agent. You were used to producing events.
Yeah,
like
but this was but not this kind of event. This was the kind of the substance. You know, I had been in the civil rights movement, and And that was the stuff that mattered to me. And people in the audience were commenting about the play, and some guy said, this play's a lot of garbage, you know. And a man in the back of the room said, not if my 20 years counts for anything. And I asked him to come on stage, and he talked about his time on Rikers Island, Dannemora, the Florida chain gang, San Quentin, and he had been around. I said, can you come back next week? People have to hear this. And he said, well, I did white time. You have to get somebody that did black time. And I said, I don't know anybody, you know. And he said, I know a guy. And he came back the following week with a man named Clarence Cooper. And that started a weekly dialogue. And I was the perfect moderator because I asked every naive question that a middle-class person who didn't know that whole world. And the Times did a story that said the drama continues after the curtain falls, and on Tuesday nights, and every Tuesday night suddenly there'd be 8, 10, 12 guys. And I would hang out with them, and we'd go out afterwards for coffee. And one of the things I learned is that almost all of them were in AA, and that they had something that gave them support, that give them an opportunity to function. But they still had the rage about their prison experience. And I started getting calls, would you come and get some of these guys and speak at our school or our church? And we were on the circuit, and I said to them, you know, we have the nucleus of an organization. And the play was Fortune in Men's Eyes, and so we called it the Fortune Society. And my little theater office was the hangout. And I had no vision about leaving the theater. This is what I thought, you know, this was my Kiwanis Club. And but it grew and it built, and 4 of the guys, huge. And when Attica jumped off in 1971,
and we should explain for the people who are not up to date, but it was one of the biggest prison riots in New York, the biggest prison riot
in the nation's history, and the most violent. And the state ended up killing.
And
39.
Rockefeller, the governor of New York, ended up sending in troops to go shoot people up and killed guards and prisoners and
everybody.
Horrible.
And then
but you were invited up to try to help with the list.
Well, the inmates wanted didn't trust the state when they were in negotiations, and they had hostages, and they gave a list of outside people, and there were no advocates for prisoners at that time, and I had been outspoken in the early days of the Fortune Society. And so suddenly I get a phone call, would I come to Attica and be in the riot? And one of the great irony is 2 of the guys from Fortune went with me because I was not about to go alone, Kenny Jackson and Mel Rivers, who had both done time. We were picked up by state troopers in Buffalo. Kenny says, first time I've been in a police car without handcuffs on me. So we get into the yard, and it's, you know, Tom Wicker was there, and Bill Kunstler, and tense, and Mel Rivers says, I smell death. And then we all were called upon to speak to 1,000 rioting inmates. It's not exactly
holding prison guards hostage.
Yes, it's not exactly a DAR convention. And so I have no idea what I said. I can't recall it. But I do remember that Herbert X. Blyden, who was introducing me, said, our next speaker is the founder of the Fortune Society and the producer of the off-Broadway prison drama, Fortune in Men's Eyes. And years later, when Herbert got out of prison, was on the streets, and we were at some fundraiser, I said, you know, Herbert, I'm probably the only person in the history of prison riots introduced with their theater credits. And he said, we tried to stay informed. And I said, well, you could have mentioned some of the other shows that I was.
And you say in the book, look, you know, I don't think I changed anything there, and it was obviously a disaster. But you kept this work up all these years and have helped so many people. The last time you were on the show, it was about your show, The Castle, named after the place where Fortune has its
facility. The Fortune Academy is the castle.
Which was ex-offenders telling their own stories wonderfully, theatrically.
Still doing it, Andy. It's still playing. We're doing it Thursday night at the Jewish Community Center, and we're doing it at Baruch College and at Rutgers next month.
So my question is, I mean, I read the terrible stories you tell about the late 60s and the early 70s, horrible prison conditions. Are things getting any better?
No.
Or are they getting worse?
No.
And why? And what can we do?
No, there are too many people locked up, and you can't change, and it's so counterproductive to society's needs because people go in there with overwhelmingly with addiction or alcohol problems, drugs or alcohol problems. It's not dealt with. Their behavior and to survive in prison, you have to really behave in the way you did that got you there. there's little that motivates you. There are some programs that probe into people, but at the Fortune Academy, at the Castle, we have community meetings every Thursday night. And this is a cross-section of prison inmates, men and women, that just like any cross-section that you'd meet in any prison, and in an atmosphere that's supportive and safe, and there's no violence allowed. That's the one reason that you can get kicked out of there. To watch people come to terms with the possibility of their lives is just an incredible experience for me to watch. People come in with that prison face, the hostility, and see that how they, and the people in the play. Kaz Torres, I mean, he was slouched and angry and had that look. And he's this wonderful man, married with a kid, working, and just a beautiful human being.
And on top of all this, in the early 70s, while you're doing Fortune Society,
I came out.
You decide you need to come out, well, not just come out, but come out very publicly, join the board of the National Gay Task Force at that time, and you're on the David Susskind Show. When I'm a kid, I'm watching you.
Well, the Fortune Society was about 7 years old then, and I was very insistent about people standing up and, you know, telling your story and be proud of who you are. And one guy said, the crime is what I did, it's not who I am, and we use that to, you know, be honest and get that stigma and change people's attitudes. And I suddenly realized I'm living a duplicitous life, and I'm not doing what I'm urging other people to do. And I was approached about being on the National Gay Task Force original board, and I said yes, and that meant coming out. So I said, well, instead of it being a rumor, you choreograph it, because I was a press agent. So I contacted Gene Kennedy at the Susskind Show, and I said, do a program about people who are, you know, you've done gay activists. How about gay people who are living double life and have successful careers? And she said, what a great idea. Do you know anyone? And I said, me. And she, oh, who would have known? And I said, could have asked. But the most moving part of all of this, I called the key people at Fortune, 7 men and 2 women, all formerly incarcerated people, and I said to them, I had 3 things to tell you. 1 is I'm gay. 2 is I'm going on a national television show. And 3, I will submit my resignation. I have a letter of resignation if it hurts the organization. Long pause. Kenny Jackson, recovering alcoholic, recovering addict, formerly incarcerated, says to me, what are you going to wear on television? Not the question I anticipated. And I said, what? And he said, well, look the way you dress. Get something nice and make us proud of you. And then Mel Rivers, former gang kid from Bed-Stuy, probably the most sophisticated political statement ever given to me. He said, you've told us for 6 years, 7 years to stand up and be honest. Give us the opportunity to stand by you.
Nice.
And
now, you said, in fact, that that you felt that some of your civil rights work and prison work was transference from working on gay rights.
No, I didn't. People said that to me, okay. And I said, well, if that's true, then why do I meet so many gay people who are Philistines, neo-Nazis, or indifferent? I don't think being gay or being a closeted gay person automatically made you a liberal. There had to be other.
It helps.
But there had to be other factors going on. Yes. I would like to think that all gay people are progressive, liberal, and we've learned otherwise.
We prove the opposite.
But it is something that, for a white kid from the suburbs like me and others, it opens your eyes. Look,
I was also the only Jewish kid in it. I was the only Jewish kid in a grammar school, and I was aware of it. You know, the irony is I was a good athlete as a kid, and so I was always able to get by, because if you can shoot a basket or hit a ball, you're not.
You were shooting basketball in your People magazine spread.
Yes, that's true.
Yes, I remember.
But certainly what this trajectory and all of this is in the book, Fortune in My Eyes, yeah. Which is a fascinating read. This trajectory from the so-called glamour life to this life of substance is a fascinating one, and it seems clear that this is much more rewarding for you than what people would think would be.
And I think that the funny thing is that I think that the media would be much more interested if the story was that I was working with prisoners and suddenly found a career in the theater.
Yes.
I don't think that they understand. I find a lot of people, my friends in the theater, a woman came up to me and said, are you still working with criminals? And I said, I don't quite see that's what my life is. I'm working with men and women who are reclaiming their life.
Well, your friend
lives.
Jim McGreevey is reclaiming his life, former governor of New Jersey, who came out and now does is a priest, or is working.
He's working in a county
church.
jail. And
he's going to be interviewing you when?
Tuesday the 16th at the community center on 13th
What
Street,
time?
7:30. He's going to do a Q&A.
With you?
With me.
Okay.
And he's been a good friend. And you know, we met at the Irony, two gay men, and we meet and talk about prison conditions because he's working in a county jail, and he's come to the castle and very interested in
And one of the
Fortune.
times I was most proud of you, you were appointed to the City Commission on Human Rights, and you called
By Ed Koch.
by Ed Koch, but you called a press conference. I don't think you never hear from the Human Rights Commission anymore. You called a press conference together about how religious leaders, with what they were saying about gay people, was giving a signal to bad people that it's okay to beat up on these people. That was quite daring in those days.
I think I was proudest on the Human Rights Commission is that one other commissioner and myself, we went in and looked at the conditions in which immigrants were being jailed. And Ed Koch's people said, we can't talk about that because it's the federal prisoners. And we said, in the city of New York. And as Human Rights Commissioners, how could we be silent about people being in conditions like that? That was the Koch, well, that's another story. Ed Koch is another story for another time, a long one.
I am
dined
impressed
out
by
on
the
this.
fact that in the face of what seems an overwhelming and intractable problem like prison
prison system.
conditions, yeah, and the whole system, that you have not been afraid to plunge in and do what you could and make a real difference.
One person at a time. You know, it's while you're waiting to change the world, if you can focus on one person, it makes a difference. And then the accumulation. I mean, the alumni of the Fortune Society is incredible. The number of people who have come through Fortune there's a guy who was retired and is now working up at the castle because he got bored in retirement. He came to Fortune in 1970, Rod Taylor, and he was 29 when he came in. He had been in and out of jail since he was 8. And he said the other night at a meeting, I finally went someplace where I had where people believe that I could be something better than I thought I was. And it's not that complicated. Now, the problem is the media, if you put on television tonight, there must be 40 programs, fictional, across the board, all about crime. They're not interested in the stories about people who are fighting and struggling to change their lives. And I find people come to me about Fortune, they always want to know, what did they do? Where they meet someone and they say, what did they do? And I said, well, they got up this morning, they had coffee, and they went to it. No, what did they do that got them in jail? I generally don't know unless it comes out in a discussion. I don't ask people what were they convicted for. And my friend Kaz says, look at all the things I got away with. So you just saying what I got convicted for doesn't say who I am.
And you've worked both sides of the criminal justice system. You were instrumental in helping Charlie Cochran, who was a New York City police officer, come out publicly, declare himself to work for gay rights. And
Wasn't that dramatic,
it was,
Andy?
oh my God! A guy gets up at the hearing on the gay rights bill, and he's a cop, and we're like, well, we knew, but I mean, people were like, and he said, I am proud to be a New York City police officer, and I am equally proud to be gay, and the room just went nuts.
Well, half the room went nuts. Half the room
friends,
went nuts because the other half were the evangelicals and the PBA and the church. Yeah. But we had a meeting, Andy and me and about 5 other people sat with Charlie and said he wanted to come out, and we said the best way to do it is at the city council hearings when we were fighting for basic human rights for a segment of the population. And at every hearing, they'd have one pro and one con, one for the gay rights bill, one against it. And traditionally, somebody from the PBA would be against it. And so when the PBA got up and spoke, then they said the next speaker is Sergeant Charles Cochran, and all the gay guys said, they just had one. They're getting 2 in a row. Shut up. Shut up.
And on that note, we have to wrap up because the credits are rolling. But this and much, much more in David Rothenberg's book, Fortune in My Eyes, or see him here in New York at the Community Center Tuesday night at 7:30. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
And thank all of you. And we will see you next week.